This is Chemical X. I am Internet Space. So, what I want to talk to you guys about is Star Wars and the political nature of it. Um, and this should be a fun conversation, but also a sensitive one, one that will probably be met with some contention, but one that I feel like um, I'll be able to argue to be true. So let's get into that, right? Um, so what made me want to have this conversation? Um, Don Dominus, who if you follow the show, you'll know, right? Hopefully, we'll maybe be able to have this conversation together on this channel. Don and I were talking, and he was saying that it's like to speak about our country, to speak about America, that to support the Democrat Party feels like you're supporting the resistance, right? I mean, they're literally calling themselves the resistance at this point. And to vote for or follow Republicans or especially Donald Trump is like being on the side of the evil empire. And it's just funny how what happens is that ideologically we are culturally to the left. And that is because media, Hollywood, and entertainment, right, is just full of leftist ideology. So so woke culture infiltrating almost every part of our society as far as entertainment, school, literature, media, right? It's all being overrun by leftist thought. And so it's culturally accepted to the point of it feeling as though anyone on the outside of that ideology is evil or part of some resistance. But honestly, if you're on that side, if you're on the leftist side of thought, you are the empire. You just don't realize it. Because you agree with the empire, you think that you're doing the right thing. Let me explain. It's very common these days to call yourself a socialist. For people to run in America for president to openly call themselves socialists. And the people who call themselves socialists in this country kind of try to uh, cut through it by calling themselves democratic socialists, as if that makes any difference. A socialist is a socialist, and a democratic process will always be under threat of being non-democratic if the process is a socialist process. And here's why. Let's talk about the empire in Star Wars. The consolidation of power removes freedom for everyday individuals. Socialism, by definition, is the state control of private property and wealth, right? So a system that tries to consolidate power and govern totally under that centralized power, that would relate more closely to the empire, to the first order. And it's funny that we don't see that. And here's why, right? You cannot have equality and freedom. It's a funny little thing, but they do not go together. They do not run one and the same. Reason being is that if I create true equality, I have to take from somebody, or I have to bring somebody down in order to lift others up, even if I don't talk about it financially. What if I said that, you know what, LeBron James, you can't be LeBron James because most people aren't 6'8", could run a 4.44, 5.40, jump 45 inches vertically, right? Dunk a basketball, shoot a basketball with efficiency. You know what? We don't want people like that in our society, because you make short people and non-talented people feel self-conscious about themselves, and you make too much money because you're too rare and therefore too valuable. And we can't have millionaires. We need everybody to be even. You cannot create equality without quelching freedom and liberty. So that's the issue, right? That is the age-old issue with leftist political thought and right-leaning political thought, right? Whereas even because right-leaning thought has always been went so hand in hand with faith and religiosity, right? That the attempts to actually tell people what to do has typically emitted from the right of thought, which is funny, right? But what's happening in today's society is that concepts that help to promote freedom of freedom of opportunity, right? Concepts like that have become more right-leaning policy, because leftist thought has went so far towards totalitarianism and socialism and communism that you have to understand that if you are a stark supporter of the Democratic Party, and your belief is that by voting for the Democrats that you are voting for the good side, you have to start to look into what the politics of those decisions mean. And you have to understand that, because like I said, that you can't get equality and freedom, that if you want total equality for all people, you cannot do that without telling people what to do. You cannot do that without being a communist. You cannot do that without being a socialist. And communism and socialism has not worked anywhere. Communism is happening in China, right? The reason that communism is living in China and that is not challenged is because China is so large. They're trying to become a world leader, and they have worldwide influence. So to challenge them would literally take war, and nobody really wants to go to war with China. You know, I mean, everybody understands that that's like probably not a good decision. So what happens is that that's why you have, in our real world, you have Trump trying to fight China's some of the things that they're doing with trade, where they have created a trade deficit with us by charging us large taxes, fees, tariffs, whatever you want to call them, on our products coming in, or not allowing our products to come in. For example, the Chinese don't take our rice. Of course, we get a lot of rice from China. Things of that nature, right? So the thing about they also do price fixing, things of that nature. They devalue their own currency. So because they're a communist government, but they're operating in what is globally has been a free market, is more so, it's a lot of crony capitalism though, right? But you're talking about a free market capitalist kind of global government with this big time communist country that's trying to get involved. We don't let Russia do that, but we let China do that because they're large, they're strong, they're modern in their economy and in their military, and they're powerful enough that we know that we have to play with them rather than fight them. But in reality, their people are not happy. You look at the people of Hong Kong who are fighting not to come under the control of China in certain ways, such as a person being able to be extradited to China that is from Hong Kong. These are things that the Hong Kong people want to keep their freedom, and the symbols that they've been using of freedom that they want to continue to have from Chinese control is the American flag. They're waving the American flag in Hong Kong. So what you have to understand is that America being based on freedom, being based on liberty and justice for all, freedom of speech, the right to bear arms, you have to understand that the empire, the first order, you don't have free speech. you don't have rights, you don't have sovereignty. They can destroy your planet, or they can come to your planet and tell all the people what to do. It completely disrespects local government in favor of telling people what to do, what to think, and who their ruler is. And I don't think that we understand what that actually means ideologically. So when you look at what would be the center of thought, or right of center of thought, right, would be the Jedi principles, right? Because they're spiritual, so they're faith-based, right? What would be what if we look at today's modern leftist ideological thought? God doesn't exist, right? We only have to respect the religious beliefs of Muslims these days, really, because they're brown-skinned people. This globalist leftist kind of thought tells us that they're protected religious society, but because Christianity is predominantly white, it's not protected and it's evil, and we have to worry about it, right? So today, uh, a Jedi and a Christian would be more closely related. To be a religious group that's looked at as negative, a religious group that's looked at as oppressive, and things of that nature. Whereas there was a time where, I mean, it also goes back to the samurai, I should say. And when you look at that story of kind of how they lost power and influence, in uh, by the ushering in of a totalitarian, supposedly democratic government. So we don't seem to really understand these principles and how they work, because freedom is what makes this country great, not the attempt to create equality. Equality has took a place in this country, um, because of the fact that freedom is the number one principle of which is based. Because we have the freedom to protest, we have the freedom to say, you know what, I don't like that. We have the freedom to vote so that we can play a part in our political process. These are the things that keep us from having an evil empire that can descend upon us. And we don't understand how these things work. We don't understand that you have to protect speech, and that if you really understand what protection of speech means, you understand that you have to protect speech even when you don't agree with it. So if you don't agree with someone calling a a a biological man that says he's a woman, if someone says, you know what, that's still a man to me, you may not agree with that. You may feel like transgenders should be able to choose whatever gender they like, and that's fine. Guess what? I'll fight for your right to believe that, and I'll fight for the other person's right to believe what they still want to believe, right? Because the funny thing is that in this leftist thought, we have this negativity towards Christian, especially religious beliefs, right? But then we're there's also a religiosity to the beliefs of the left, such as that there can be so many different genders, such as beliefs in equality of outcome. But the thing is that freedom helps you to create the equality of opportunity. Equal opportunity should be, and in a lot of cases has been, the goal of policies that come from the center, policies that are bipartisan, policies that maybe are more democratically uh, modest, or um, what is democratically moderate, right? Or moderate Republicans, people who are center left, center right. I think in our society, in our history, has looked at the equality of opportunity. And let me give you some examples of that. Equality of opportunity, in when you believe in that, that is part of what will motivate you to say, okay, let's free the slaves, right? Right? Because when you do that, that now has given them the opportunity to be free and create a life for themselves, right? But we have freed the slaves, and we didn't give them the right to vote. So then you had to have an amendment to give them the right to vote. So not only do they have their freedom to actually live their lives, they also have the freedom to be able to pick, or be a part of picking, who their representatives are, so that they can be represented by a Congress and by a a a a main branch of government in the White House that can actually speak to and for them. But when you put your thumb on the scale is when you kind of change those things. When you're trying to create equality of outcome is how you get policies like affirmative action, how you get welfare, things of that nature that create dependency on the government in order to survive. Once you create this, you are getting closer to a totalitarian society where government is all powerful and freedom is quelched. We seem to truly not understand that as a concept, right? So because we don't understand it as a concept, we have an issue of understanding what we're seeing in our own society. You should be ashamed of yourself if you are rooting for the impeachment of a president that is fully partisan. Why? Because that means that Congress will begin to think that it can decide for the American people who their president should be. So this isn't about side picking. The fact that the Republicans did this to Clinton has created kind of this place where if maybe a crime wasn't committed, but something indecent happened or was said, we can run to impeachment. But that is never what this was supposed to be about. Nixon and other one of the first impeachments I believe was a real impeachment. Nixon's impeachment, he would have been truly impeached had he not resigned because he broke laws. He did things that you should not have done, right? But we don't get to have vague reasons to impeach presidents because you are overturning the results of an election. And let me get to this: protecting freedom so that we don't fall under the rule of an evil empire. And let me expand on that evil empire thing. Because we're living in a globalist society or a society where governments are attempting to converge into a global ideology, right? The US and the UK was going down this direction, really, really far down the left of that direction, with Obama in office and so many other extremely left-leaning global leaders for predominantly white countries, with China involved as well. So things like the Paris Climate Accord, organizations like NATO, organizations that are really consistent of governments combining to be able to govern almost totally in a sense. Once you start to go down that path and you take away sovereignty, you take away the ability for a nation to make its own decisions based on what is right for its people. This is the same concept of why we have states and that there has been so many fights in this country about state rights versus federal rights, because there's an understanding by some in the true nature of this union that was created that states will have the right to be able to govern their own people, that the local government is how we affect certain issues. For example, when someone says that they don't like abortion or that it shouldn't be federally funded, those kind of people have, to me, what is a point, because I'm fine with abortion existing from a state to state basis. If the people of that state want it to exist, if that's a blue state and they want that to exist and that's a part of that state taxes, fine. And if I'm so bothered that my taxes will go to abortion, I can move to a state that doesn't accept that, right? Rather than federally telling everybody that some of our income must go to um, uh, something that pays Planned Parenthood so that they, on a federal level, can operate in other states and or whatever that they or wherever they want doing abortions, right? Things like that should not be federally mandated, in my own opinion. So when you go from not just federally, from a state to state, but you go globally, imagine America having to live by the rules of the Chinese government. Imagine how scary that would be for America to be under the control of China, right? And if you don't want to imagine it, you don't really have to. Look at what America was like under the control of Europe. You don't want to be ruled by people who are a whole ocean away from you. Africans don't like it, being ruled by the Britons, right? And this colonization of the world is uh, what you would be looking at as what an empire does, right? Because empires can change. Right now, the empire, right, is the American government at this particular point. We kind of dictate what happens globally, right? But because we are believers in freedom, that dictation lends itself to trying to free and create democracy in other places. And let me bring that back to where I was taking it, which is that when you talk about democracy, that is also something that can be mistaken or misunderstood as what place it plays in freedom versus equality. We are not a democracy, okay? We are a constitutional republic. Our Constitution, our Bill of Rights, sets forward what our rights and what our freedoms dictate, right? So that Constitution is gold as far as the standard of how we operate as a society. It's why so many of our elected officials are lawyers, because when they study law, they're studying. It is important for them to understand what the Constitution allows, what freedoms are, what rights exist, right? And they also, because they're lawyers, they sit there and they rewrite all that stuff with millions of words, and now everything, any book that comes out of the government would take you 17 days to read. But with that being said, right, this all goes back to the Constitution. This all goes back to law, right? When it's all said and done. So the reason that we aren't a true democracy is because a true democracy could fall victim to demagoguery, to someone just saying, vote for me and I'll do this, I'll set you free. We already have that, right? Imagine if you took away our constitutional republic, so then you took away the electoral college. This is what would happen, and this is something that everybody needs to understand. And if I make this point well, I won't have to say much else, right? The majority of the population in America lives on its coast, the West Coast, the East Coast. Anybody can look at a political map and you would see that the left coast and the right coast, which is the West and the East Coast, are bright blue. It's where the majority of people are. If we went with a true popular vote, almost every president would be whoever the two coasts want to be president. And all the people in the middle of America, all the people in Southern America, all the people in all these other parts of America would not have their voices heard. I said this to somebody one time, and they were just like, well, we don't care because those people are all racist. See, this is the demagoguery that you have to be afraid of, and is the reason why we do not have a popular vote, because the Democrats constantly telling you that people that don't agree with them are racist don't actually make those people racist. Some of the things that middle America wants is because it's geographically different, okay? On the East Coast and the West Coast, you have a different economy. You have jobs that have nothing to do with using your hands. If you live on the East Coast or the West Coast, you can make six figures plus never using your hands, never getting them dirty. You can live your whole life having the softest hands that anybody has ever seen, right? Because you're typically, well, I mean, California has farms. There's farms right here where I live on the East Coast. But what I'm saying is that farm country, the place where people really do live their lives based on what they can toil from the ground, that's a lot of that is in middle America. A lot of that is where our factories used to be. When you talk about Detroit and the auto industry and things of that nature. So when you come in with a bunch of leftist, globalist policies that help to build other countries by building factories in those countries and taking them from America, by gutting the ability to create for regular everyday people to become rich by making businesses, by increasing business taxes and giving incentives for Americans to make their businesses in other countries, that builds those countries up. Those kind of policies are why people like Donald Trump win elections. And that's something that we don't understand, because these are people who want to have that freedom of opportunity return. And if you're telling me that if I live in middle America, I'm basically, well, I need to move to one of the coasts in order to be successful, that is not a winning argument for why anybody should want you to be their president, right? So these are things that we do not understand, and we need to understand. All voices need to be heard. So you have to be able to say, okay, the way that we can make sure that um, nobody ever skips over Iowa and only campaigns on the East Coast and the West Coast and wins the presidency is so that we give Iowa a certain amount of electoral votes in the electoral college, so that if you do not get a certain percentage of votes in Iowa, it's going to be harder for you to win a national election. That is an important concept. That is a part of what is tied to American freedom. That is tied to all voices being heard in this country. Let me tell you something to end on. Hitler won a popular vote, because not only do you give way to demagoguery, where I can just say, you have to vote for me because if you vote for them, they're racist, right? Is that I can say to you that you have to vote for me because if you don't vote for me, I'll kill your whole family. That's a real easy way to get a popular vote, okay? So at the end of the day, that's the other reason why we don't have a popular vote. We have to understand, like I already said, the importance of freedom of speech. We have to understand why we have an electoral college, so that we cannot have an evil empire control us with fear or demagoguery. And third, we have to understand why we have the right to bear arms. We have the right to bear arms because we did once have control. We were once controlled by a different system, by a different country, by a foreign government, right? So why was America able to win the Revolutionary War? Well, because of private local militias, because everyday Americans had the right to arm themselves and create militias and join the battle. Why don't people invade America, but you invade other countries? Well, because the civilians are armed, right? So these are things that you have to, these are small things that we don't think about, but they play a role in how our society works and why we are a prosperous government. If I take your guns away and I take away the right for you to express yourself, for you to be able to say, you know what, I get where you come from, that it may be good, but I don't want you to force that on me. I don't want you to force me to have. What if I have a 4-year-old daughter and she's going to the bathroom, and a man can just say that he's a woman, and that person can be a sexual predator. And well, let me not say 4, let me say 8 years old, because then that kid will be using the bathroom by themselves. Let's say my 8-year-old daughter wants to use the bathroom, and you have integrated bathrooms in your state because you have told me I just have to be okay with it, right? No matter what my argument is. Okay, if my 8-year-old goes in that bathroom and a sexual predator goes into that bathroom just saying that he's a woman, doesn't have any kind of the features of a woman, has not had any kind of surgery in order to be able to truly be able to say that he's taken any steps to actually changing his gender. And what if he rapes my daughter in that bathroom? These are the kind of things that are actual things that we have to talk about. This is not about bigotry. Is the black community actually prospering from wealth care and social programs? Studies will show you that they're not. So removing them isn't a conversation of being racist. Removing them is a conversation of, okay, do we still need our finger on this scale? Are black people better off today than any other point in American history? Yes. Why do we still spend so much of our taxes towards this then, right? Towards the war on poverty. Are we doing this to keep ourselves in power, or are we doing it because it's best for the people? So I just want to be able to take that second to be able to display this message and this imagery, that and make it understood that a politician that is fighting for your right to be free, do as you say, do what you want, is a politician that is not just thinking about his own longevity and his career in politics. That is a politician that actually cares about your life and the life of your children, because that is a politician that understands that the only way that this country can be prosperous is if our people are prosperous. And if we forget about educating and helping our people to be strong and free, but are more focused on our people following by towing the line and doing as our government wishes us to do, we will lose sight of that. So I'll leave you with this. I mean, that is the statement that is meant by John F. Kennedy when he said, ask not what your government can do for you, ask what you can do for your government. If Kennedy was alive today, he would be considered a Republican. He would never have been able to run for president without being called a racist, a xenophobe, all of these kind of things that are all pretty much nonsense. So I just want us to understand ideologically, today's leftist society or leftist ideology that is infiltrating our society and many other places, that's being rejected in the sense of having Trump in power, in the sense of what just happened in Europe, where Boris Johnson's party just won so overwhelmingly and the Labour Party has been all but decimated. It's because people are rejecting the far left of politics, because you can see in your actual everyday life, no matter what the media tells you, no matter what a politician tells you that you should feel, that you're less free and that you're less prosperous, and you'll come to the realization that everybody that's telling me that I shouldn't be happy and I shouldn't feel this way is a celebrity that's far richer than me and therefore less affected, or a government official that's way more financially better off than me and not affected. So we have to understand the issues of consolidation of power, how they come about, how they happen in the real world, so that we can understand what side of politics is actually the empire and which side of politics is the resistance that wishes to free us. It's definitely not the side that's trying to tell us how to think, when to think it, what to say, if or not we should be able to protect ourselves with our own weapons, if we should have an electoral college. These are all concepts that will lead to our demise. And I'm so sure of it that as much as I don't want it to happen, a side of me is beginning to feel like America almost needs the reality check of becoming a true social government, socialized government, before we realize how bad it is. So my true final thing is, do some research on the Scandinavian countries. You always hear Bernie Sanders talking about the Scandinavian countries as if something that should be the model for America. They went full socialism and it destroyed them. Sweden going full socialist destroyed them. So what they did is they added back the free market to their social government. So they still have socialized healthcare, but private companies are paid by the government to put forth that healthcare. They have socialized education, but private education, people receive subsidies that they can use to send their kids to different private schools. Let's think about that. What is Donald Trump trying to do? Get school vouchers so that black people who could never afford to send their kids to private schools will be able to send their kids to private schools. The Democrat Party is telling you that you should not want that. And why? Because if you go to private schools, you have the ability to learn an alternate education. When we have such a far left tinge to our education as well, when we have a far left ideology being taught to kids in school, the Democrats would love for it to continue to be that way, because it puts them right in the forefront and their policies right in the forefront of people's minds. When you actually tell a kid in high school that trickle-down economics is a real thing, when it's not, it's supply-side economics, and it's shown to work, right? You can actually effectively get somebody to think that the Republican way of handling finances is inherently racist and will never work, when there is no actual evidence that that is the truth. Actually, the evidence points to the opposite, which we're seeing in a Trump economy, which is pretty much the borrowed economy of of I'm drawing a blank here, of Reagan, right? That increases the supply side. So you cut regulation, you cut taxes, so that people can have more money to spend. Businesses can have more money to put back into the economy because rich people tend to create more jobs and more innovative things if you give them more money, and they actually give back much more as well. If you actually look at statistics on this, you don't have to make rich people pay a lot of taxes. If you cut their taxes, they tend to give more money away because most rich people, when polled, say that the only reason that they don't like giving away their money in taxes is because they don't think the government will manage it well. Rich people think that they can manage their money better than the government can, and it's because they can. It's a fact. So these are things that you really have to understand how they work in the real world and how they affect policy and how they affect your life. So to free a society is not to force it, is not to force equality upon that society. It's to allow people the right to think how they want, to protect themselves, and to be free as God intended, whether you believe in the concept of God or not. So, who's the real empire in our real life world? I think I already answered that question. So that's it. Thank you for watching. Please do like and subscribe. Maybe we can have a little bit more talk on this subject. I am not far right. I'm not any of that nonsense. To call me that will make you ignorant and dumb. So, you know, that's just the way it is. But feel free to hop in the comments and I'll argue with you if that's what you want to do. Peace.